Oregon State and Washington State get a big legal victory over the weekend, and it makes rebuilding the Pac-12 a lot more likely.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and soon-to-be Pac-2 dominated and beloved and loaded Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review. Please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch the show, which today is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDON for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So we've had a lot of back and forth with this legal jargon with Oregon State and Washington State and controlling the Pac-2 and who's on the board and who votes and everything like that. So initially, Judge Gary Leiby ruled Oregon State and Washington State are the only voting members. And then a different court put that on hold and said, no, we're not so sure about that. Let's tamper that down. And then another ruling came down over the weekend, and that said that Oregon State and Washington State control the Pac-12, Pac-2, whatever you want to call it. So they're in control of the assets. Now, the context of the ruling is important because what the context of this ruling says is that Oregon State and Washington State, you get to control the financial assets, which make rebuilding the Pac-12 more feasible for 2025 and beyond, as I'll get to in just a moment, but they can't act any way that they want to. It basically said the simple version, the dumbed down version, so that we're not all stuck trying to, become internet lawyers in a 36-hour period. What it says is that Oregon State and Washington State, you get to control all these hundreds of millions of dollars that normally would have been dispersed to the conference equally, right? To all 12 members would have been, I think, around $35 million or so. I don't know if anyone has an exact number, but it'd be in that sort of range. But you get to control what happens to it. But if you hog it all for yourselves, then the court is going to re-inject itself into the situation and say, no, okay, you can't be that mean. So we'll get to that later. But this means that Oregon State and Washington State have a really good chance of getting an outsized share of that money than they otherwise would have received. So under the stay or under the previous way that things were potentially going to go before this whole lawsuit came down, Oregon State and Washington State would have gotten an equal share with what the 10 departing schools would have received. Instead, the 10 departing schools are going to get some amount, but there's going to be a lot of money left over. And Oregon State and Washington State are in control of it. Apologies for that. Didn't know there was a landline in here. There it goes. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. I'm visiting my grandparents for a family reunion. So that's what today's setup is. First time I've done a show from here, by the way. Appreciate you all being tuned in. Anyway, getting back to work here. Oregon State and Washington State are going to have a lot of basically extra money. Now, another thing that still has to be figured out in the courts is what happens with the debts and liabilities. Because I think what Oregon State and Washington State were also trying to make sure is, hey, if you're going to depart and you want to get, X amount of dollars, you have to take on, some of the liabilities that are tied to the conference as well. You can't take the revenue and just the liabilities. And so I think that for them to figure all that out is what's going to determine how much exactly they have. But the rebuild element suddenly becomes very possible because if you've got a bunch of extra money left over, well, now you can help teams facilitate exits from other conferences. So you could go to the cream of the crop of the Mountain West, who you now have at least a closer relationship than you did a few months ago, given the scheduling alliance and potential basketball merger in 2024 and 2025. Nothing has evolved on that front, by the way. But you could help facilitate those exit fees. You could help facilitate exit fees for teams from the American Conference if you wanted to go in that direction. And you could build the premier Group of Five conference in all of college football. Now, is that something Oregon State and Washington State automatically want to do? Not necessarily. It is certainly an option. And I think with this ruling, it becomes far more likely because now they're going to have access to a healthy amount of money. We don't know exactly how much, but it's more than just an equal share for what the 10 departing schools are going to get. So if they're getting an outsized portion of that revenue, they could use that to pay off the debts and then try and rebuild the conference if that's the direction that they wanted to go. And they're in control because this ruling, and it doesn't look like the Washington State Supreme Court is going to weigh in on the matter. This ruling says that the only voting members of the Pac-12 conference are Oregon State and Washington State. So they are now, for the first time in quite a while, in control of their own future. So that makes it it is a big step. I'm not trying to undersell that whatsoever. There are still more aspects of this, I think, that need to be worked out before we have a full vision or a full understanding what exactly these teams are going to, or what these schools rather, are going to do. So that's the latest on the legal front, which brings me to the mailbag. YouTube comments or on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. DMs and mentions are wide open there. This is from Mark. Hey, Spencer, love the reporting this season. With the changing landscape, technically I'm not a reporter, but I get the point you're going for. With the changing landscape of conference realignment, does it make sense for Oregon State and Washington State to remain independent until the next big conference shuffle, even if it takes longer than 2 years? That is a fantastic question. And I think that is going to be a subjective one. I think you can make the case either way that Oregon State and Washington State could be set up best for success by trying to rebuild the Pac, or remaining what they are essentially are now, which are college football independents. And we know that independents are going to have an opportunity in the 12-team playoff to get into it. And tomorrow I'm going to have Carter Baines of Beaver Blitz on the show, and we'll talk about how Oregon State can be potentially a playoff team under Trent Bray going forward. But I think that for the Beavs and the Cougs, you can see a path in which they set themselves up for success in the next round of realignment, because that has to be their ultimate goal, right? Long term, if you're Oregon State and Washington State, you're trying to get into either the Big 12 or the ACC, or you hope that Chip Kelly's idea comes to fruition. And Chip Kelly had a well thought out, shall we say, 2-minute soliloquy on college football, where he basically said, yeah, football should be independent from everything else, like Notre Dame. You should have 64 teams at the Power 5 level, 64 at the Group of 5 level, and then it should be one giant media contract, and you could structure the schedules like they do in the NFL, where you've got West Coast teams you play every year, and then you play the North, and you play the East, then you play the South, and you would rotate around. I think that's a great idea. The problem is I think the conferences have too much money, power, and influence that they are not going to be willing to just give up willingly. And there is no body that can force them to do it because of the situation that the sport has found itself in right now to allow for that to come to fruition. So if you're Oregon State and Washington State, I don't think you bank on that. I think you bank on what you alluded to, which is the next round of realignment. You got to set yourself up to be targets for the Big 12 or the ACC, as crazy as it sounds, to expand and add you as members of their conference. Now, if that is something that's feasible, you can say, look, going the independent route gives you the most flexibility, maybe building the best G5 conference in the country. Maybe that's the best option. I think that's something that I'll probably have to explore a little bit here on the show and dive into a bit more, but you can go either way. You can go either way. I lean towards the G5 option of building, a conference with teams from the American and teams from the Mountain West. And if you then build that conference, having a conference championship in the 12-team era is probably going to be sufficiently alluring to where it's, going to help you remain relevant nationally, right? Because they value the conference championship in the 12-team era. And it's got the auto bid for, the highest ranked Group of 5 team. I think that is a highly intriguing option, but it doesn't have to be the only option, because it could limit you a little bit more, schedule wise, whereas, maybe they want to, have things that are set in stone and solid, or maybe they'd rather, kind of go at it on a year by year basis. I don't think we know the answer to that question for them just yet, but I think that's, the sort of question that they are certainly talking about right now in Corvallis and Pullman, respectively. Another question came in about one particular individual who is involved with all of these items, but how involved is Oliver Luck, and what exactly is he doing? What exactly are you doing with eBay Motors? I'll tell you what. Everything that you could possibly need. Passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That's ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right. So when I look at Oregon State and Washington State, there is certainly clarity with this move, more of it. I don't think it's entirely clear what we're going to see from them going forward. But Oliver Luck has reportedly for a while now been involved, who's currently commissioner of the FCS newly minted United Athletic Conference. He's reportedly been consulting for the Pac-12, and this question came in from Patrick. Besides the insightful work of Gloria Nevarez, the Mountain West commissioner, behind the scenes, Oliver Luck was hired as a consultant by the Pac. Any word on his continued involvement with the Pac-2? He's in an advisory role, is my understanding. I don't know how much he is advising them. I do know for certain that George Kliavkoff has not been involved. So, how much Luck is advising them or what he thinks the best option is or how much influence that could actually have, we don't really know the answer to that question. Like, he's there. I don't know that he's a major player enough in a way to where he'd be a shoo-in for the commissioner if they were to rebuild the Pac-12, which, as I said, after this legal ruling, appears to seriously be on the table. I think that if the Pac were to poach the best teams out of the Mountain West and get teams out of the American, Mike Oresco is retiring from the American Conference. He was the commissioner there. He built that league up after the Big East crumbled, where he was the commissioner and did a really good job. Nevarez has certainly got a really solid reputation and pedigree as well to, potentially be the commissioner of that conference. Luck would certainly be a candidate given his involvement with a whole bunch of sports management entities and just, business ventures in the college sports and professional sports world. So I don't know that he's a name everyone needs to have at the top of their minds right now, because until the conference decides, and that's, of course, Oregon State and Washington State now, until they decide, hey, we want to rebuild, this is what we're going to do, they don't have to be looking for a commissioner. Right now, they're kind of their own commissioners, right? They're setting their own schedules the way that, Liberty did before they joined Conference USA, and the way that BYU did for a long time, the way that Notre Dame still does. I mean, that's essentially the world that they're operating in. Like, it's really not that different other than, branding and the television deal. When branding and television deal very much tied together. So apart from having a television deal, Oregon State and Washington State are no different than Notre Dame right now in terms of how they approach their season, because Notre Dame has to, set a schedule on a year by year basis. They do have some matchups that they, schedule out ahead of time. They also have some protected matchups. They always play Stanford. They always play USC. But, last year they played Cal. They don't always play Cal. They play, I think, Clemson all the time out of the ACC. So whereas Notre Dame's alliance of, schools that they're going to play regularly is with the ACC, for Oregon State and Washington State, it's just with the Mountain West. And so that's a viable way to build a schedule every year. Is it the best way to build a schedule? Maybe not. Maybe you could argue that, building the best G5 conference you possibly can is the way that you're going to get all of that involved. But here's the thing. If you're Oregon State, Washington State, thinking about, bringing on somebody like Oliver Luck to be the commissioner of a new Pac in 2025. And by the way, I should mention, just to be clear, a rebuilt Pac-12 doesn't start until 2025. That would be the timeline here. It would not be 2024. Everything is already set in stone for that. It's going to be, at the very least, a one-off independent season. There will be no conference championship game in the Pac, and that's the way that it'll be. For 2025, it could be a different conversation there. So I think that for Oregon State, Washington State, you have to ask yourself, with the way they've been burned by commissioners in the past, do they want to go back to having one? Do they want to go back to having one? My light just fell. Give me a moment here. But do they want to go back to having one, or do they want to just go forward as independents and say, we're just going to set our own schedules. We're going to make it work as best we can. So I think that's a decision that they have to make, and it comes down to a matter of personal preference. And again, I could see it either way. If you look and go, boy, Larry Scott was a mess and George Kliavkoff didn't work out either, what is having a commissioner ever done for us? On the flip side, having leadership can certainly have its benefits, as it has for other conferences, if you have the right leader in there. So that's kind of the decision that they have to make. If you got any questions on that, as always, YouTube comments or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. Let's talk about Oregon State here, because on the field, Oregon State is going to have a team in the Sun Bowl that we'll talk about tomorrow with Carter Baines is very different than the one they put on the field this year in many ways. However, their roster for next year is starting to take a little bit of shape. So they've brought over a couple of players from the Colorado Buffaloes, the center and running back Anthony Hankerson as well. But they brought in another player, Anthony Jones, who was a one-time Oregon Duck, one-time Indiana Hoosier, former three-star recruit from the Las Vegas, Nevada area. I remember covering him when, on my show, of course, over at Locked On Ducks when he was there, and he didn't play a lot. And I don't think he played a lot at Indiana. That's why he transferred to Oregon State. I think that he's got some solid potential. I don't know if he could be, what you consider an all-conference caliber guy. Of course, that threshold has been lowered substantially for 2024, of course. But I think that for Oregon State, he's a guy who can certainly become a solid edge player. And with Andrew Chatfield Jr. gone, that's a position of need. And so I like that Oregon State is going out and moving in that direction. He was a three-star recruit, and the way that he looked coming out of high school as a true freshman when I saw him on the field at Oregon, I thought he looked solid. I thought one day he could become a player for the Ducks. He, of course, wasn't able to find his way up the depth chart there. But I think that's somebody that, could come in and as a third-year player is physically ready to contribute. He's been in the weight room for a couple of years at Power 5 programs. And I think that he's someone who, isn't going to be exactly what Andrew Chatfield Jr. was, but I think he can be a solid player. So it's good. And I point this out before I get to Malik Murphy, that to say that Oregon State has had some notable losses in the transfer portal. They've had their kicker and a young freshman corner, and of course their two quarterbacks, and they're losing offensive linemen as well. But Trent Bray is starting to make some moves in a positive light, and I think that's a good thing for Oregon State as they look to compete at the highest level they can for next year. Still got to figure out the quarterback, and they're looking to do just that with Malik Murphy. So he was spotted at the Portland airport for a visit with Oregon State, and Trent Bray, of course, was there as well. I saw the picture floating around online. It was like kind of secretly take. I didn't take it. I don't know who took it and whatnot. But anyway, this has been well documented anyway. Malik Murphy is the backup quarterback from Texas who filled in this year and won football games in the Big 12 conference. And if you're Oregon State, getting Malik Murphy to be your quarterback for next year, I think that'd be a home run. I've talked about the potential of adding Ty Thompson, who's, former 5-star recruit and whatnot. Murphy, I think, would be a safer addition. Could you argue Thompson's got a higher ceiling? Yes, you absolutely could. But I've talked about this before with Oregon State. If they're looking at 2024, I think it has to be, and for Trent Bray as well, an all-in proposition in the sense that you're not trying to sell Oregon State fans and the rest of the college football world on, hey, we're going to be good in 2 to 3 years. You've got to show that you can compete right now, because the narrative is already trending against you in a big, big way. But if Oregon State comes back next year, and let's say they go 10-2, they lose a game to Oregon and they lose a game to, I don't know, like Cal or Boise State or somebody like that, and they're inside the top 25, that kind of sends a clear message of, hey, we're not going to just roll over and die here. We're going to fight, and we're going to put up quality football seasons and a good team year in and year out. I think you've got to show that in year one. I think Trent Bray has got to show that in year one as a first-time head coach. His salary is only $2 million, and I think that's reflective of Oregon State saying, hey, we want to go with you for continuity reasons. At the same time, if this turns out to be a situation like the one they had at Mississippi State where they promoted their in-house defensive coordinator and it's a disaster, we got to be able to move on and move quickly, because you've already got a big perception problem in Corvallis, and you have to be able to, assure not just your fans, but your alumni and the rest of the country and players and recruits as well that, hey, we're going to continue being competitive, even though Jonathan Smith and Aiden Childs and everybody have moved on to Michigan State or elsewhere. So I think that Malik Murphy from Texas, a guy who can come in and is going to be able to succeed, because you have seen, assuming he's got enough tools around him, because when he has that at Texas, He wins games against Power 5 football teams. And yeah, Ben Goldbranson's done that as well, but Murphy's got, plenty more talent. I don't remember if Goldbranson's got another year of eligibility. I know he's going to play in the Sun Bowl and he's going to start. But yeah, so he could be technically Oregon State's starting quarterback next year. He's still just a redshirt sophomore. But is that the option you want to go with? No. I think even though Oregon State actually had a worse record this year than they did last year with Goldbranson starting, I think it's pretty clear that DJ was an upgrade. Malik Murphy would be an upgrade in that sense. And heck, I think he could even have a better season than DJU if they're able to get him, because Oregon State's not going to be his only suitor. He's a pretty hot commodity in the transfer portal as far as quarterbacks go. And I think that would be a massive, massive get for Oregon State, just for their credibility and their ability to compete in 2024. Malik Murphy would be massive. But he's not the only quarterback whose name popped up on the transfer portal radar over the weekend. Do you know the name Malachi Nelson? Are you aware of who he is? If you are not, let me tell you a little bit of a story. Malachi Nelson was once a member of the USC Trojans. He has decided to put his name into the transfer portal, and he, along with Ty Thompson, have something in common. They are former 5-star quarterback recruits who presently do not have a home or a place to start in 2024. And so these are guys who have not taken meaningful college snaps. Nelson has been with USC for just 1 year. Ty Thompson was at Oregon for 3. Both have big size, big size. Thompson is 6'5". I think Nelson is around 6'5" as well. Big dudes, big arms. I saw Malachi Nelson when he was in high school throw the ball live a little bit at the 7-on-7 camp down in Las Vegas in 2022. He can really spin it. He is a supreme athlete. He is twitchy, big arm, and he throws a really tight spiral and a good ball. So USC looks like they're going to go into the transfer portal to get their next quarterback. And I think that is the way college football often goes now. Not for everybody. JJ McCarthy was developed at Michigan and Jalen Milrose developed at Alabama. But a lot of times big time programs will say, why go with a young guy and endure growing pains when you can just, get someone who's proven right now. And USC looks like they're going to go after Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback, who of course led them to a Big 12 championship a season ago, and then got ultimately kind of semi-benched this year for Avery Johnson, the freshman. So I think that for Malachi Nelson, I don't know which schools he's going to yet. It's just a name that you should have on your radar out there. Would he want to stay out west? I don't know. I don't know. Have not spoken to him. Ty Thompson, same question. I don't know. But those are two guys that if they find the right offensive home, they are tremendous talents. They are tremendous talents, the sorts of which don't come along super often. If you can develop them and get them into your offense successfully, you can do a lot of great things on that side of the football. So I think that for Nelson and Thompson, they're probably looking for places where they can go start. I don't know where that's going to be. But anybody who picks him up is getting a supremely talented quarterback. And I don't think he's someone that, any Pac schools necessarily have on their radar. I mean, I never count out Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State because he knows how to recruit quarterbacks that are talented in a big way. But I think that those are two names. I'm fascinated to see where they end up next year, because if they find a spot where they can pop in a big way. They need the experience, but there are plenty of schools like, think of an Indiana that just hired James Madison's head coach. You don't think they'd take a guy that caliber to start as, Ty Thompson be a redshirt junior and Malachi Nelson would be a true, or probably, I think he redshirted this year, redshirt freshman. I think they'd take a chance. So fascinating to say the least. Let's go to the mailbag here. Once again, YouTube comments or X, both are options. X, formerly known as Twitter. This question from Bud. Beginning in 2024, the opening round of the college football playoff will be played on the third weekend in December, basically winter. Given that these 4 games will be hosted at the home of the highest seeded teams, a la the NFL, the chance of inclement weather, rain, snow, and wind, is quite high, particularly in the north, and schools will be out of session. How will this impact playing conditions and attendance at these games? So before I answer that question, I am a staunch opponent of the 12-team college football playoff, while also fully recognizing, I know this is going to bother some people, but I can hold two thoughts at once. It's really easy. Watch. There is an upside to the 12-team playoff. And one thing that I really enjoy about it is that you are going to have playoff environments on campus sites, not neutral site games, but you're going to have on campus games. I think that's a great move, a great move. And no matter the environment, I think that the urgency and excitement that, being in the playoff creates on a team's home campus, you're going to sell that place out. I don't think it's going to matter. Like if, let's say, for instance, Michigan is a 10-2 team next year and they lose to, Washington or Oregon and Ohio State, and they're in the playoff and they're hosting a first round game against somebody else. You don't think those fans of Michigan are going to go? Because I do. I do. And I think that environment will be rocking. And, kids will be on winter break. And that is certainly an unfortunate element. I'm going to venture a guess that those kids that would be showing up if they were on campus for a home college football game are going to find their way back to school. I don't think you're going to have any problem selling out a stadium, no matter the weather, the conditions, or what, wherever you go in the country. I think you're going to have fans that'll want to show up to these games because it turns out here in these United States, we like football. We like football a lot. And so given that reality, I think fans, you give them a chance like that to play for a championship, I think they're going to show up. They don't have any problems with it in the NFL. Fans will bundle up and endure rain, wind, sleet, whatever. I think you'd see that. And yeah, I think it could be really fun. I think the home playoff games, I think that is arguably the best part of the college football playoff. Those environments are going to be absolutely electric. Trio of quick questions here from Tyler, who likes to bounce around with the questions, which is okay. It's a college football show, but it's not like college football is the only thing I have any reasonable knowledge about or opinions on. He asked about Al Michaels being removed from the playoff coverage, Justin Herbert being done for the season, and Brandon Staley's subsequent removal, and Aaron Rodgers potentially coming back. So Rodgers is not going to play. I think it's all just kind of an attention scheme, frankly, like the whole idea that he was going to come back and play. The Jets are out of the playoffs. Rodgers is not playing. Al Michaels, I love Al Michaels. I have my whole life. He's one of my icons as a play-by-play announcer. I think he is outstanding. NBC taking him off of, their playoff coverage, I understand it because Al Michaels is just getting a little bit older. Like there are a lot of great announcers out there, and Al Michaels has been one of them for a long time. But you even saw with a guy like Marv Albert, for the last couple of years, Marv Albert did not have his fastball. And I don't think Al's, got his fastball the way that he did 5-6 years ago. So I don't know all the politics that went into that move, but, from a consumer standpoint, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world, even though it, creates a headline. It's not, always super pretty with that. As for Justin Herbert and the Chargers, as an Oregon fan, I root for Justin Herbert. I want that guy to succeed, and the Chargers organization stinks. And the fact that they kept Staley for an extra year after blowing a 27-0 lead, and it just everything about that screamed, this is not the right guy. And everybody could see it, and it took the Chargers too long, and they finally cleaned house. I'm glad they make those moves. And I bring this up to tie it back to college football for a moment. When you have a coach who is clearly not the right guy, if you're willing to just sit around when there have been clear and obvious signs that he is not someone who's going to lead your team to where you want the program to go, you got to be willing to pony up some cash and just cut ties with him. And sometimes you need to fully clean house the way the Chargers did with their GM, because if you just continue to pursue mediocrity, that's what you're going to get. And on the coaching front, that's what the Chargers have consistently gotten. They go cheap, and that's the way the product often looks on the field. And I think that can be reflected in college football in many areas as well. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.